Hello and welcome back to AP World History and Modern. Today we're going to be looking at Unit 8.3, Effects of the Cold War. And today's largely going to be a skill practice day. We do some claim development, sourcing, and also go over your homework, which was claim development and sourcing. And then we'll cover a little bit of content as well. All right, so our objective today, is compare the ways in which the United States and the Soviet Union sought to maintain influence over the course of the Cold War. Our standards from the College Board are here. All right. So as I check homework today in class, we'll continue this activity that we did in the last video. And those of you guys who watched the last video, you were asked to do this and email it to me, and I did receive them, so thank you very much. So just to go over this, or just kind of point out a few things before we go over this. So notice our prompt here is the exact same thing. So what we've really done is looked at this idea of causes and effects of the Cold War from a Soviet perspective, from a Western or an American perspective, and now we're looking at it from a non-aligned perspective. Okay, so hopefully your claim kind of reflects that. All right, so some possible claims you should have had, or look something to the effect of, something about fear of nuclear war, and trying to unite people around that. And of course, during the Cold War, many countries outside the United States and Europe attempted to stay neutral despite pressures, right? So, so you could kind of view what Sukarno was doing, at Bengdun as a way to stand up to the pressure that was being placed upon, on developing countries, right, or non-Western countries. All right, so something to the effect of that. These are some kind of good categories of analysis, right? Attempting to stay neutral despite pressure, or fear of nuclear war. All right, so possible sourcing, right? Sukarno attempting to convince leaders of other Asian and African countries to stay neutral in the Cold War, so they could use their power to call for peace. So, kind of a collective action, right? To call for peace. And then here we have Sukarno worried about conflict between the U.S. and the Soviets because he had seen what had happened in Korea, right? So this is we're looking at context here. The Korean War wraps up in '53, and this meeting is taking place at Bengdun in Indonesia in '55. So seeing what happened in Korea, afraid more conflict between the two superpowers could lead to a nuclear war or spill over into other nations. Right? So a very real concern. And of course, why is this a very real concern? By 1955, the Soviet Union has a couple of hundred nuclear weapons at their disposal by that point. The Americans have thousands at their disposal by that point. So there's that kind of known reality. The other thing is, of course, keep in mind what happens during the Korean War. The comments made by General MacArthur about actually using nuclear weapons, right? So that actually does come up. And I tell students in class, I don't know if it was public because I've never actually been able to find this, but I did hear a professor once. I was listening to a podcast, from a Stanford University professor, and he had made the comment that in reaction to the French Indo-Chinese rebellion, under Ho Chi Minh, that Vice President Richard Nixon had advocating using nuclear weapons against the North Vietnamese. So that being said, that would have been right around that time because Dien Bien Phu was 1954. So I don't know if that was public because I've Googled it and I have not been able to find it. I assume it was not. I guess I assume that the professor who made that comment had, maybe got a hold of some declassified files, of meetings, that he was advocating. I'm not sure, right? I'm not sure. I have done a little looking over the years, and I guess I haven't found any citations on that. So I don't think that was part of this. However, the MacArthur thing is, the MacArthur was an international scandal. When he advocated dropping nuclear weapons or nuclear bombs on China. So that would have been part of it. All right. So anyway, some possible sourcing there. All right. So that was from yesterday's, right? And your homework from last night was sourcing, and let me just kind of pull this up real quick. So the prompt was evaluate the extent to which ideological rivalries between Western countries and the Soviet bloc led to political instability or conflict in Asia in the period 1945 to 1989. All right, and then we have these two sources, one coming out of Iran, 1952, or about Iran, 1952. The other is, about Afghanistan from 1990, right after the Soviet withdrawal in 89. All right, so there's that. All right. So we're to be creating a claim and then sourcing each of those documents in one way. Just as a reminder, make sure your claim addresses the topic of the prompt. Right, you're not writing a claim based on the document, but the document can be used as a guide to help you develop a category of analysis. So when answering DBQ prompts, make sure your claims that address the prompt can be supported by the evidence from the documents provided, but we should not be seeing evidence from the document in your thesis. Okay, so just kind of a gentle reminder there. All right, so your answers to this, if you haven't already done this, make sure you do this. But your answers are dealing with proxy wars largely, right, or containment to some degree. So your possible claims should be dealing with containment, domino theory, proxy wars, something to that effect. Incorrect responses are ones that would be citing things about Cuba, Nicaragua, Chile, Angola, anything having to do with something other than Asia, because our prompt is about Asia. All right, so you could write the best, the best paragraph about the U.S. foreign policy changes between the Carter administration to the Reagan administration, and get into the every detail about Iran-Contra, and you can do all of that, and you're going to receive 0 credit because you are not answering the prompt, right, which is about Asia. So make sure you're always aware of the prompt and you're staying inside the lines. Any coloring outside of the lines is not going to earn you any credit. All right, so anyway, that's that, claims. All right, so sourcing. So the easiest way to source, the way that most students source this document, something about, they usually use the first H in the HIP, right? Historical context. Something about containment, right? Something about containment, and that's how you are contextualizing that specific document. And then give a good so what sentence, all right? So, and then you combine your so what with your, the way that you're sourcing, and you get something that looks kind of like this. All right, so that's for your first document. And then for the next document, and I always kind of like to stop and point out here, sourcing images, or even just using images, as evidence, it is sometimes tricky, right? So you can't just, if you're going to use this document as evidence to support your claim or to source this, you can't just say, such as in the victory carpet. You can't just say victory carpet and say that you're using this document. When you're using an image, either for evidence or for sourcing, you have to pull out specific pieces of imagery from the image, right? You gotta describe, right? You really have to describe. Be very descriptive of what you're talking about here. We saw this in the DBQ that we had written about imperialism. When people were using the document that showed the tapestry of the Battle of Adwa. You can't just say the Battle of Adwa and think that that's going to be your evidence, right? You got to specifically describe the Maxim guns that you see inside that image, right? Same is true here, right? You need to describe what you're seeing here. All right, so some possible sourcing. The creator of the carpet demonstrates clear pride in the Mujahideen with statements such as "Made in Africa," "Long life," right? And we're seeing the tanks leaving Afghanistan. All right, so we're being descriptive of what we're seeing there. Or the carpet is using a combination of Dari, a dialect of Persian, and English to demonstrate national pride and gratitude towards the United States for their support, right? And of course, I don't expect you to know that, by looking at this, that is Dari. Like, that's not, I would not expect you to know that. But, I mean, obviously, you know that that's not English, right? And, so just, just point out the fact that you've got multiple languages that are there, right? And, right, the Mujahideen, and notice Mujahideen is in our description here. So we need to bring something extra to this, our understanding of the document. So tell us what makes the Mujahideen, unique during this time frame. So that we're talking about guerrilla fighters from across the Islamic world, right? So the concept of Mujahideen isn't something that is specific to Afghanistan at this one moment, in time. So it's not, right? But the kind of pan-Islamic reality of the Mujahideen at this moment is unique. So, so by kind of saying this, you are bringing something to our understanding of this document, which is what you need to do in order to get sourcing credit. All right, so this is another activity that we did not do in class. So, but if you want to kind of do this just for extra review, you're more than welcome to, and I'll give you the answers in just a second. All right. So if you're doing this, here's an argument, and here are some correct responses, and some common incorrect responses. I see it's being cut off, so let me redo that. All right. So just so you can see this if you're doing this at home for practice. Okay. All right. I want to talk just a moment about kind of spread of socialism, socialist ideals in Latin America. And I want to talk, if you're going to talk about Latin American socialism, it's kind of always good to talk about Che, right? So first off, do you know who this is? And so in class, we'll kind of just say, do you know who this is? Do you know why he's well known? And all of that. So generally, we usually kind of get a few things, right? One is most students know that he's associated with Cuba. The way I describe him in class is, he is kind of referenced in a couple of movies. Actually, there's a movie made about him, about his younger life. And then he's there's like a 5-hour-long movie just about him as well, about his kind of activist life. So there is kind of plenty of kind of pop culture about him. So why is that? All right. So the way I generally introduce, Che is he, if I guess the early life movie about him is called Motorcycle Diaries. And that movie kind of looks at the kind of formation of his socialist ideologies, right? So the movie starts off, with him as a young student or finishing his medical degree. So he just becomes a doctor in Argentina. And upon finishing his medical degree, he buys a motorcycle and then spends the next couple of years riding around South America. All right. So, and of course he, I always kind of like to make a comparison. It's kind of like the Siddhartha Gautama story, right? So had a privileged upbringing, relatively sheltered, and then sees the way life is for other people. And that is formative for him, right? So we kind of see the formation of his socialist ideals during that time frame, right? So spending time with the miners and agricultural workers, etc., right? So there's kind of that side of it that's portrayed in pop culture. The Motorcycles Diaries era. He's also in Nicaragua in 54, right? So his kind of radicalization happens at a time when we see a democratically elected socialist regime overthrown by a CIA-backed CIA-backed coup, right? So this is going to radicalize him, in the mid 1950s. And then in the next year, he's going to come into contact in Mexico City with another like force. You're going to see like a meeting of two major forces come together in Mexico City. So Che, right? Che is a charismatic intellectual, radicalized by the events in Nicaragua. And then he comes into contact in Mexico City with a very young Fidel Castro, right? So Castro, having moved back from New York City in '53, gets arrested at a protest, protesting the Batista regime. The Batista regime is a dictatorship, right, backed by the U.S. government. Castro spent some time in jail, then Castro gets kicked out of the country, where he meets up in Mexico City, right? So in '56, Che and Castro go to Cuba, right? They sneak into Cuba, where they begin a guerrilla insurgency in the mountains of Cuba from '56 to about '59. So in '59, we see the guerrilla movement, make its way into the cities, and when you start to see fighting in the streets of Havana, the Batista regime will flee. So at that point, you see, the regime is gone, and you have a power vacuum. So Castro and Che together, they are one of many factions, but by no means are they actually in control, right? So between January and that summer, we see Castro consolidate power, which is a nice kind of way of saying he does a lot of the same things that we see other individuals like Stalin do. When we talk about consolidating power, maneuvering, eliminating your enemies, building alliances, that kind of stuff. So really for the next year and a half, 2 years, we see a combination of things taking place with Che. We see consolidating the power. We see the nationalization of a lot of private industries. This is going to put him at odds with the United States. We see alliance building with the Soviet Union during this time frame. And of course, part of the consolidation of power internally is the establishment of kind of these little show trials, right? So that's sometimes referred to as kangaroo courts. And it's at here where Che kind of gets the negative side of things, right? So somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple of hundred, I've seen numbers as high as in the thousands of people are killed, as power is consolidated into the hands of the Castro regime. All right. So Che he's a controversial figure, because of these events, right, that happened after the revolution was won. All right. But if you're not kind of familiar with what happens next, there is a falling out between Castro and Che. Che eventually flees. He ends up getting killed in Bolivia. I think it's in '68 off the top of my head. But yeah, he's killed in Bolivia fighting for, another socialist revolution in there. All right. So, but Che, he is a controversial figure. I did kind of I have heard this kind of theory before about why he is, so commonly portrayed, and it's the basic idea of the theory goes, there's not a lot of good looking, or sex symbol kind of figures associated with socialism. You're not going to put Lenin on a shirt or Stalin or Marx on a T-shirt, but Che is a young, good looking image, right? And one that does have a certain level of sex appeal to it. And that's kind of one theory of why you see so much of him being portrayed. That said, he is not without controversy. And in class, I usually show this video, the Urban Outfitters controversy, that we see pop up. I will put this on the website, right, where you're watching this, so that you can watch this site or you can just Google it. All right. But it does kind of look at, how one person's kind of image of what socialism in Latin America is another person's mass media. And I do kind of like the the kind of thoughts there that this is, walking around, the parts of the United States such as around, parts of Miami that have a large number of Cuban immigrants, walking around, places like that is, with a Che shirt is highly offensive. And so and they do kind of make this, and, give an example of like how when, you wouldn't wear a Hitler shirt, around, Jewish communities, and it makes you kind of think, you're probably not going to walk around the Ukraine wearing a Stalin shirt, right? So highly offensive for certain segments of the population. All right, because of what he does. All right, and of course there are other videos out there as well. So we're not going to watch any of these here. I'm just kind of showing you them. I didn't have this one queued up, so let me just kind of pull it up and I always have buffering issues, I guess, when I pull things up.
Sentence is grammatically correct, but it's wordy.
So anyway, there is a. I'll put this linked as well. There is a TED Ed that does deal with this in a more academic way as well. So yes, I'll put that on Google Classroom. All right. So talking about just spread of Marxism and Marxist regimes in Latin America. There's plenty of socialist and Marxist ideologies that we see fermenting. We do see a number of kind of really clear-cut uprisings, socialist uprisings, and we're going to see a lot of intervention. And when you talk about the 20th century U.S. intervention in Latin America, there are some continuities, right, that we see here. The U.S. government is willing to intervene in order to protect U.S. business interests, right, in Latin America. And we do see this take place a number of times. The real change, I guess, is the way in which that intervention takes place. Before World War II, you're going to see, generally the deployment of the U.S. Marines, right, as a way to, to intervene in order to protect interests or American interests. After World War II, you're going to see the CIA as a new organization. Right? So you're going to see the CIA being used largely, in order to protect American interests. So there are some examples, where the Marines will be deployed in. Obviously, Grenada in 1983 is one, Panama in '89. Right? There are a series of examples, where we do see that. So let me just kind of see some more examples, but yeah. So, but there's, when it comes to Cold War politics and proxy action, that kind of stuff, there's no shortage of interventions. I guess next week we'll talk about Chile a little bit, right? And just take a look at that. All right. So in class, we did kind of take a minute and just kind of look at this and discuss. We did talk about this real quick, just as another one of these components of the Cold War. I do point out with this that, 1955, this is when the Bandung conferences, that whole non-aligned movement gets up and running, and you can kind of see here what's going on. So the Soviets are definitely armed by the time you get to the mid-1950s. Why are people so concerned when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened? There might be a disparity in the number of nuclear weapons, but the Soviet Union still has over 6,000 by the mid-1960s. By the mid-1960s, this concept of mutually assured destruction is generally the accepted norm by the major powers, right? So by the mid-60s, there's a realization that war really can't happen, right? So it's impossible to imagine the United States surrendering to the Soviet Union without using their nukes, and vice versa. And if that is your reality, then you can't go to war, right? Because going to war means the end of humanity. And I guess you could definitely say that today about the Soviet Union Russia, China, India, the United States, or any of our allies. It's kind of hard to imagine any of them actually going to war with each other, and just because the consequences are so dire to humanity, right? So, and of course, there is that old Einstein quote, right? The war after the next one will be fought with sticks, right? So, and I'm paraphrasing that, and I probably got it wrong, but you get the premise of what Einstein was saying there. All right. Other components of the Cold War we haven't talked about. When it comes to dramatic scenes of the Cold War and and whatnot, Germany definitely provides plenty of good examples, of things. So obviously the Berlin Blockade, 48 and 49, provides one. I don't really mention this in class normally because most of my students haven't read the Achieve article about the Candyman. So if you have not read the Achieve article about the Candyman, it's a pretty good article and kind of gives you the basics. It gives you what you need to know about the Berlin blockade. Obviously the Berlin Wall going up. From the Berlin Wall going up to the JFK going to the Brandenburg Gates and giving his very famous speech, being Ein Berliner, which to most of the world means I am a Berliner. Although when I was a foreign exchange student, I had a friend who was from Berlin, and he told me that in Berlin, a Berliner is a jelly donut, and that he actually, but anyway, you get the point. So to the very famous Ronald Reagan speech in front of the Berlin Wall, asking Mr. Gorbachev to tear down that wall, and of course, the coming down of the wall in November of '89. Germany is like the epicenter of, kind of actual events taking place, right? So, so it's always good to kind of be aware of Berlin and what's going on doing it, because, it is the scene of some dramatic scenes, so of course, students often ask me how, can you get over the Berlin Wall? And of course, the answer is, of course you can get over the Berlin Wall. It's 10 feet or so high. It's not the Berlin Wall that's the real obstacle. It's the kill zone, right? This kind of kill zone in the middle, and then the other barbed wire fence, and then the other barbed wire fence, and the armed guards, and my students are. I will say, like, when we talk about like landmines and this, I do have the occasional student that is utterly shocked that the East Germans would rather one of their citizens die than leave. It's a shocking idea. It's hard to wrap your mind around today, that any country would be willing to kill, not arrest, kill one of their own citizens in order to prevent them from leaving their country. It's a hard thing to wrap your mind around, right? So, but it was, right? All right, proxy wars, right? So anyway, there's all kinds, right? Just be aware of them. Really, know one really well, right? So know one really well is always the best advice, right? These kind of. Yeah. All right. So reminders when you make comparative statements, right? So comparative statements must characterize place. Being compared, you must fit into the same category as well, right? So, so basic categories of analysis when you're making these kind of similarity comparisons or differences comparisons: defensive alliances, nuclear proliferation, proxy wars. Okay. So those categories of analysis are where everything stems from, though. So make sure you're kind of mentally noting these categories of analysis as we go through. All right, so debrief, and I'm gonna just kind of debrief and sign off, and then I'm gonna go through some additional slides because I assume you know a decent amount about the Cold War, just from your homeworks and whatnot. But I'm just gonna show you some slides that I've shown over the years. Just if you want to. So definitely do not have to stay on. And I'm not even going to go through them. I'm just going to show them to you. All right. So stay on if you want and don't if you don't. Okay. The two global superpowers did not fight directly, right? Mad. All right. Two global superpowers sought to spread their influence through nuclear proliferation. Two global superpowers sought to spread their influence through building alliances, right? NATO, Warsaw Pact, and beyond, right? Also a series of economic alliances and other geopolitical alliances. Two global superpowers sought to spread their influence through control of Germany, right? Germany is a pawn, right, in much of the Cold War. And the two global superpowers sought to spread their influence through numerous proxy wars. All right, so if you're signing off, Sapriati. If you're staying on, then just kind of show you some, if you're looking, like we did use that as a category of analysis, symbolic victories of the Cold War. If you look at the space race as one of these symbolic arenas of the Cold War, the Soviets dominated initially. It's not until 61, that the U.S. really starts to even get into the game. And of course, by 68, the U.S. has firmly taken the lead. And of course, 69 is the moon landing, right? So, and from that point on, when it comes to technology and space, the U.S. really has no competition after this, at least up till today. So things can always change. All right, as far as Berlin Wall, right? So 61, we see it built. All right, and it'll stand until 1989. And I will post this video on my thing as well, because we do watch this in class as well. Just a video about the wall kind of going up and then how it came down. This series of events, that led to it's coming down. And then what happens right afterwards. All right, so I'm just going to pause it. I'm going to let that disappear just so you can see this. Right, so you can kind of see the different stages of the wall. All right, and I always kind of found this to be amazing, right? Kind of Berlin from space. Right, and you can tell exactly where the split between east and west was. All right. Cuban Missile Crisis, right? The images that started it all. All right, and so yes. Yeah, I remember the first time that I was reading about, kind of this in depth, and I found out how mad Castro was. Castro never had control of the nukes, and Castro was, he didn't find out about the decision that Khrushchev made to back off, to back away from the standoff until he heard it in the media. Right, he was not consulted at all about this, and Castro, according to the people who were with him at the time, right, because they've all been, a lot of them have kind of gone on video and said this, that he was furious. Castro was furious that Khrushchev backed down. Castro wanted to die. He wanted Cuba to become ground zero in the war that was eventually going to take down the United States. So Castro wanted to die as a martyr, when this went down. All right, détente. All right, so I guess thank goodness people like JFK and Khrushchev, had cooler heads or allowed cooler heads to prevail. So we will enter into this period of détente after the Cuban Missile Crisis, this easing of relations. Right, and of course the infamous phone, right, the direct line between Moscow and Washington. So I'll let that thing go off so you can pause if you want to read. Okay. All right, détente. All right. Olympics, another one of these symbolic arenas. So, during the Cold War, the gold count was everything. Right? What was the gold count? What was the total count? And of course, this is the gold count from the 80 games. The United States, we boycotted that game as a result of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Right? And we already talked about in the last video or a couple of videos ago, the winter games that year. All right. And of course, there's the 84 games, right, which were boycotted in retaliation to our boycott of the Moscow games. So the 80 were the Moscow games. We boycotted them because of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and the Soviet Union boycotted the 84 LA games because we boycotted their games. All right. And yeah, I'm not going to watch those. All right. So some examples of uprisings, right, against the or by the Eastern Bloc countries, right? So we see the 53 uprising after Stalin dies, right? So kind of in reaction to that, pushing the boundaries. The famous Hungarian Revolution, following the Khrushchev speech, right? Following that Khrushchev speech, the de-Stalinization speech, right? And of course, the very famous 68 Prague Spring. And of course, 68's a volatile year. We'll talk about 68 in a later video. All right, Khrushchev and Mao. This meeting did not go good. So Nixon and Mao, Eisenhower and Khrushchev. All right, the famous Vienna meeting between Kennedy and Khrushchev. Khrushchev was not impressed with Kennedy, found him to be weak, which is probably why you see Khrushchev putting the nukes in Cuba. All right. And Berlin Wall falls. Maybe I'll put that video on as well. If you are interested in watching it. And then we'll get into the fall of the Soviet Union, all this kind of stuff later. If you want to kind of use some some economics, kind of look at what's going on during the Cold War. Here's some data looking at Reagan, right? The Reagan years, kind of getting towards the end of the Cold War period. Thatcher, of course, is another kind of interesting way to look at this, the kind of waning years of the Cold War. All right. A couple more Berlin things. Berlin document. Sometimes I use in class. We'll let this thing pause and see. It's President Kennedy. The Cuban blockade. And I found this kind of a neat little infographic one, little timeline. All right, and I guess one other thing, and maybe I'll show these later on. Maybe I won't. I don't even know. Other ways that kind of socially the Cold War manifests itself. McCarthyism, right? McCarthyism in the 50s, right? And so there's that. You also get some in addition to the non-aligned movement, you get this whole nuclear non-proliferation movement taking place. And of course, the more the Cold War intensifies, and the more nukes are kind of openly used, the greater the nuclear non-proliferation movement is going to become. Right, so ban the bomb, anti-nuke kind of stuff. What do you do in case of a nuclear accident? Kiss your children goodbye. Some kind of great signs. And also this little thing here. If you're familiar with the peace sign, the peace sign's not actually a peace sign originally. The peace sign is a nuclear disarmament symbol. Right, it's a symbol for nuclear disarmament. So if you're interested in, or if you weren't aware of that. All right, this is a 56 document, or a Hungarian uprising document from 56. Korea. And Korean War, just showing you kind of before and after. Vietnam and Korea. Sandinistas. Right, so if you want to do a little Sandinista stuff, and of course, there's always the song. If you want a pop culture reference to it, you gotta always Washington Bullets.
Oh, mama, mama, look there. Children are playing in the street again. Don't you know what happened down there? I used to 14 got shot down there. The cocaine guns jammed downtown, killing crowds of blood-money men.
Right. So yes, when music had political meaning, that was actually relevant. All right. So anyway, couple Nicaraguan Sandinista kind of documents here. All right, and that's probably good enough for today. All right, so I will see you next time. There you go.